International Relations. Welcome to another program, Eagle and the Condor, here in San Francisco on BayVac Media, and that's live streaming now at sfc.org, or you can listen to this program, TV program, at aim-west.org. Just scroll down, Eagle and the Condor. Today we have a very special video coming at you from the United Nations press conference that includes William Jimbo Simmons, also Jean Roach of American Indian Movement Grassroots, and Tara White Eagle and her daughter Kaylee Martinez, also of American Indian Movement Grassroots. This video was taken there at the United Nations press conference room on Wednesday, April the 19th, and we talked totally, as you will see, about Leonard Peltier, his incarceration, 48 years, my relatives, is a long time, 5 of those years in solitary confinement, which is cruel and unusual punishment at the international level, my relatives. Don't forget, also a reminder, listen to kpfa.org, live streaming 94.1 FM out of Berkeley, and that is Bay Native Circle on Wednesdays from 7 to 8 p.m. Also on Fridays, La Onda Bajita at kpfa.org for 94.1 FM on Friday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. And there's a segment across Indian land that I host. All right, my relatives, the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, which was held April 17th through the 28th, included 2,500 indigenous peoples from throughout the world gathering together in an international global movement to seek our rights to self-determination, honoring the treaties, and protecting Mother Earth. All right, let's go into that video at the UN press conference. And each year since 2009, AIM West has been credentialed here at the United Nations under the category of Indigenous Peoples Organization. And with that credential, we have been able to bring the voices of Indigenous peoples primarily from the Western Hemisphere, although we'll be open in the future for other regions of the world, but we've been able to credential Indigenous peoples who are involved at the community level, at the struggles, on the struggles that are being faced, whether it's extractive industries, protecting sacred sites, speaking for the rights of human rights defenders, for example, which we will cover here, but all aspects, and of course, treaty rights. And the United States government, for example, needs to honor the treaties that they have made, for example, with over 350 indigenous tribal communities across the country. And it says so under the United States Constitution, the Article 6, where treaties are the supreme law of the land. And we hold the government of the United States to that. The United Nations has conducted many studies on honoring treaties, including that of the Special Rapporteur Miguel Alfonso Martinez, who completed the study on treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements, 1999, and it has served to inform governments that these treaties need to be honored, and indeed through that advocacy and over the years, the evolution to what we now call the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, was adopted by the General Assembly in September of 2007. Of course, I have to preface that by saying that there were countries that were very reluctant, resistant, unwilling to sign that declaration in September of 2007, and primarily four countries of the world, namely Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and yes, the United States. And shortly thereafter, Canada adopted the declaration, then New Zealand adopted the declaration, Australia adopted the Declaration on the Rights of Indian People, and finally President Barack Obama adopted the signed the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples on December 2010 in Washington, D.C. And through that, we come to the United Nations here, for example, and during this session, 22nd session, we will be addressing items of the agenda, in particular, item 3, which we talked about yesterday, and item 3 of the Permanent Forum agenda is discussion on the theme Indigenous Peoples, Human Health, Planetary and Territorial Health and Climate Change, a rights-based approach. And our intervention referred to water, the sacredness of water. Imni Wichoni, water is life, and that water is not a resource. Water is a living relative of all of ours. And you just have to look at your rivers, because rivers and lakes have memories. They go and they come back, they know where to go. If you can look at it in that way, my relatives. And perhaps Thursday, tomorrow, we will have our representative, a young person. Yesterday we had our young person, Wakion Lapointe, speak on the water for item 3 with us. And today or tomorrow, item 4 will be read by our young delegate here, Kaylee Martinez, who we'll talk to later on. But item 4 is discussion on the 6 mandated areas of the Permanent Forum. That is economic and social development, culture, environment, education, health, and human rights, with reference to the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. That's a long sentence for item 12, or 4 rather, but within that, we will be addressing human rights defenders, and also in particular the case of Leonard Peltier. And if I just may say a little bit about political prisoner Leonard Peltier, as of February this year, 2023, he's now launched into his 48 years in prison, and for a crime he did not commit, my relatives. So keep that in mind. We won't go into the details necessarily of that case, but we had a side event, a workshop, in other words, here in the United Nations, they call it side event, and that's fine. But among our presenters included, and he's not here today, but that is former federal judge Kevin Sharp of the United States, and he was appointed by President Barack Obama to sit on the bench as a federal judge. And Kevin Sharp, through his experience on that bench, he realized that the United States justice system is a little imbalanced, and he resigned himself from being judge. And he also took the case of a young man that he sent to prison for life, and he got out of his judgeship, and he supported, and eventually he got the man that he sentenced to prison for life, he got him out. And he got turned on to the case of Leonard Peltier, and he said this man should not be in prison. So we'll hear more at some point down the road about Kevin Sharp, the attorney for Leonard Peltier, my relatives. And now I'd like to first begin with the interview here with our friends. To my far right, I have William Simmons. We call him Jimbo in the American Indian Movement. We also have Jean Roach, AIM Grassroots, and her colleagues here, Tara White Eagle, and we also have our youth delegate, Kaylee Martinez. I'd like to start our discussion with Jimbo. If you can please, as we lead up to the case of human rights defenders and Leonard Peltier, explain to the people a little bit about the struggles of American Indians and what led up to, I guess many people in the world remember Wounded Knee, 1973 in South Dakota, and the occupation that ensued there for 71 days, surrounded by the United States military, and what ensued after that. Please,
Okay.
Jimbo.
Do I turn this on? Do I turn this on, or is it on?
There's a little button.
Was
Is
my
it
button
on now? Do you know? Hello? I see the button, but
Well, I don't think my button was on.
oh no.
Would your voice carried your strong voice?
Okay, well, please, Jimbo.
Well, thank you, Tony. And once again, it's an honor to be here at the United Nations to share our struggles and information of what's happening in our country and our lands. And I'd like to just say that this year is the 50-year anniversary of the American Indian Movement and the occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973. And I always have to refer 1973, that occupation, as the wake-up call for indigenous peoples around the world. Because if it hadn't been for that occupation in 1973, there would be no indigenous movement today. Many of our brothers and sisters that were involved in the earlier indigenous movement, many of them have passed on. Many of them are, and I've seen some here today getting older, but we're still here carrying on that resistance. And I call it the resistance because for me, our struggle is much more than human rights, natural rights. It's what we want. Human rights is the way I look at it, is what they give you when they deny you your natural rights. But we, as indigenous peoples, want our natural rights. And for me, that is what we was giving in the beginning of time. And for many of our tribes and nations, we still follow those original instructions. And it's those original instructions for many of us that are being denied as basic human rights today. And it continues on today in many, not just here in North America, but throughout the Americas and in some places throughout the world. So for me, I would like to also look at it that if it hadn't been for that stand that the American Indian Movement made, we wouldn't have these forums today. And I can say that because my first work with the international movement began in 1976 when I attended the Third International Treaty Gathering of Indians that was sponsored by the American Indian Movement in South Dakota. I was elected as a delegate at that time in 1977 when they had the first UN gathering. But unfortunately, we had to raise our own money, and I wasn't able to make that commitment at that time. But it gave me an opportunity to kind of research my own life at that particular time, because I was a young person, and I realized what, being educated, but also being part of the boarding school system, I realized that what treaty rights were really meant and what our elders were talking about. So that kind of inspired me to get more involved in some of the international work. In 1981, I was elected as a delegate to go to the United Nations on indigenous peoples in the land. And it was there that I've been able to understand more clearly what those rights were. As a matter of fact, many of us that came around that time, we participated in the Human Rights Commission. That's what it was before it became the Human Rights Council. And it was there that many of us began to lay the groundwork for some of the resolutions that eventually became the Permanent Forum, became the UN Treaty Study, and which even led on to the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In 1977, the first draft of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was basically 7 principles. And when it became the Working Group on Indigenous Populations in 1982, it opened up the discussion to include many other indigenous peoples from the world. As a matter of fact, the working group became the largest UN forum within the United Nations system, particularly the Human Rights Forum. And as the years came along, that forum became even bigger than the human rights that people that were there. So there was a change somewhere, I think 2005, and I think that there was political changes, and of course, my only personal views of why those changes took place. But for background, that's what I always look at in terms of why we're here today. And as the American Indian movement, we continue to carry on our struggle. Always look at the word Indian as a form of resistance. That's what we look at, is it resistance. The term Native American, indigenous peoples, I even have difficulty with the term indigenous peoples, because I look at that as the new form of colonization, and more so in the form of a UN colonization, because we're still nations. For example, I'm a Choctaw, and that's who my allegiance is to. It's not to the United States. It's not to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, tribal council governments. No, it's to our own selves as a sovereign, independent individual. And as individuals, that's where we get our sovereignty from. And to me, it's that sovereignty that we apply to what we mean by when we say nationhood and nation states. So to me, we have a long ways to go, and formulating recognition of indigenous peoples. Always say too that our philosophy of life, our way of life, is just as valid and just as important as any other way of life in the world today, but it's not recognized as a way of life that is up to standards with the rest of the world. And what does that mean to us? Well, for some of us, that means we continue to live in balance and harmony and continue on to carry on our own natural laws. And currently, I'm involved in some of the water projects across the country. And one of the resolutions that we're presenting is the rights of nature. What does that mean? Well, for us as indigenous peoples, nature has rights too. All the living, they are living beings too. So as indigenous peoples, in the beginning of time, we learned to watch nature. And that's where we got our values from. That's where we learned how to plant. That's when we watched the seasons. We learned all of that. And to me, that value system is still here today, but it's not recognized. And so that's why we're here. That's why we as American Indian Movement continue to carry on that resistance here within these halls as well, because we're here as allies, and sometimes we have to look at each other as allies and what we can do for each other. So this weekend we're having a water conference in Oklahoma, and if people can, I don't know if it'll be telecast or anything like that, but if you can, it's going to be in a Cherokee Nation in the south, in the eastern part of Oklahoma. It'll be 2 days, And then it's a camp out where we have to come and, camp out. We'll have ceremonies. We're going to have a water ceremony. Our women is going to have a ceremony where individuals, people are asked from their areas to bring water. And to us, water is a life giver is what our women say, because many of that, we're all part of that water. 90% of our bodies are made up of water. So we understand that connection when they say water is life in Mini-Wachoni. So today, we bring that message, not only that, but that all life is sacred, and that we as indigenous peoples, our rights need to be respected more so. So I just want to say that, and I hope I can cover it a little bit, but if there are listeners out there and they have questions, please feel free to call in, or however this process develops. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jimbo William Simmons. And just to refer back, 1977, when Jimbo was referring to the Declaration, which was a precursor, as he said, to what today we have, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and indeed set in motion, that conference set in motion to what we have today, a global indigenous movement. So we have much to be thankful for of the American Indian movement and people that sacrificed through the struggles there in North America, including Leonard Peltier, once again, that we're going to come back to. I'd like to now introduce Jean Roach of AIM Grassroots to talk to us of her struggles and what she's involved in and working with human rights defenders and like that. Please, Jean Roach.
Yes, my name is Jean Roach. I'm Minikoju Lakota, and I live in Rapid City, South Dakota. Hi, my name is Jean Roach. I'm Minikoju Lakota. I'm from Rapid City, South Dakota. And I just represent AIM Grassroots, which is a grassroots organization. I'm also on the board for the International Leonard Peltier Defense Committee. And some of the issues that we're going to be addressing for Leonard is after 48 years, going on 48 years, he needs to be free, his health. He has an aneurysm near his heart that could explode at any time. He's a diabetic inside of a federal prison with inadequate food. He suffers, several different pains with his knees and different things, but I can't imagine laying on that little 2-inch mattress, for 48 years. And it's sad that he has to pay the price. So Leonard's been in there for a while, and we need supporters and anybody that organization, individual, governmental. We are asking people to step up and ask Biden to grant clemency to Leonard Peltier. A lot of the work that we've been doing includes meeting with several different organizations and governments. We have a lot of support that we built up last year in Europe. We met with the Human Rights Division in Germany. We also met with the mayors in Geneva, which we also got a big support letter. I think there's 5 or 6 mayors that had to come together for that letter. We also got, we met with the, what do you call it? The French Parliament members from Polynesian area, and they've granted their support. And in Italy, we went to Rome and we tried to meet with the Pope, and we sent a request letter, but we didn't have the right timing. But we did find out that Leonard Peltier is a citizen of Rome, which happened way back in the 1990s. They did some work over there, the previous staff of the International Leonard Peltier Defense Committee. So now we're waiting for the city council, which includes 66 divisions of Rome, who we met with like 6 of them, including the elders. They have an elder council that have said that they would give letter of support. We're waiting on that. We also have several issues with our treaty. The 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, which covers in South Dakota. And when the initial FBI, I guess, let me explain, there was a firefight in Oglala, 1975, and that's one of the reasons why Leonard Peltier's in prison. He was framed. There's been no evidence that he was the person. His co-defendants, Dino Butler and Bob Robidoux, were acquitted on a basis of self-defense. We feel that that should have went towards Leonard Peltier too. There's only 3 adults that were charged. The most of us that were there were teenagers. We escaped. One of our lawyers, Bruce Allison, told me they used over 35,000 rounds of ammunition at us, and we were just young. We were able to survive that, you know. We had an area where we had to run that, you know, there was no rocks, no trees, nothing, just straight up the hill. But it was, one of the things that we did learn is that, you know, there was a major land transfer that happened during that time with Oglala Sioux tribe, Dick Wilson, who was totally against American Indian movement. That happened during Wounded Knee, when the United States government used military action and supplies during the Wounded Knee occupation. After that, we call the Reign of Terror between 73 on, really, there was over 60 deaths of people that were either shot at, killed, or ran over, and none of them were investigated. The same with Joe Stuntz, who was also killed on June 26 in Oglala. So there's like a one-sided system, and we all know that. And there's been a hate campaign against Leonard Peltier because he was the last person left to be the scapegoat that was illegally convicted. And there's several problems with his illegal conviction. And at this time, clemency is one of the last things that we're hoping for. And we have Kevin Sharp, the former judge that Tony was talking about. And he's really been a great add to our movement. So right now, Leonard's in Coleman Prison. If you guys want to write him a letter, and maybe, you know, you can't send cards. You have to use a white paper on white envelopes, no color, so it's real drab. Send a nice letter and use some good words. And also, don't forget the president writing to Biden every day if you want. You can email. There's a place on the internet where you can get the address, the email address. And also, you could call the White House, and there's special hours for that. But also, Amnesty International just started a worldwide campaign that you could check out. And I think one of their, you sign a petition and the email automatically goes to the president. And so there's several ways, and just saying his word. If you're here at the UN getting ready to do an intervention, just say Free Peltier. You know, this is enough. We have a political prisoner that's been in there for generations. He hasn't met his grandchildren. He hasn't met, you know, his parents have passed away since he's been there. Several different things have happened to him. So also remember him in your prayers. And, you know, it's just really sad that we're still here after 47 years asking for justice. And that's all we want. And basic human rights. We're not asking for no special treatment. We're just asking for the real basic human rights that we all deserve and everybody deserves. So I'd like to ask everybody to, you know, like I say his name, make those phone calls, because you're very important in this fight. And we got letters from all different types of organizations. We have several senators and Congress people that have signed on this year. Previously, in the 1980s, there was over 100, almost 200 senators in Congress that signed where it supported his freedom. They were ignored. We have FBI agents and previous federal prosecutors that have came forward asking with letters the president to release Leonard Peltier. We have tribal nations, almost every tribe has written a letter for Leonard Peltier's freedom. So we encourage you to ask any of your organizations that you're with to send a support letter and help us in our fight for justice and freedom for Leonard Peltier. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean Roach, very much for that. And indeed, my relatives, you can call the White House and leave a message with President Joe Biden at area code 202-456-1111. That's area code 202-456-1111. And you can do that now while you're watching this and spread the word, tell your friends. We're at optimum moment right now, never before in these 48 years that we're talking about freedom for Leonard Peltier. And by the way, his parole hearing is at 2024. We want him out before then, of course. But this is the most, as Jean Roach mentioned, all the support from Congress people. In fact, last September, the Democratic National Committee that represents 70 million Democrats in the United States have supported by resolution and passed that on to President Biden, who is a Democrat himself, that it's time to release Leonard Peltier. We also have word that the Vatican, the Pope himself, Pope Francis, has forwarded a letter of correspondence to the White House calling on President Biden. What's up with the Leonard Peltier? Why isn't he released? Why he's not home? And these countless Nobel Peace Prize winners, including many of you know Rigoberta Menchú, who received the Nobel Prize in 1992. She's been a supporter for Leonard for that time. Not to say that people like Jimbo and indeed myself, we've been coming here 42 years at Geneva in 81, and myself here and Geneva in 83. But that's 40-some years that we've been trudging and still talking for Leonard Peltier and for his freedom. So, it deserves your attention, my relatives. Also, just real quickly, the former prosecutor, federal prosecutor for the United States, who convicted and was responsible for sending Leonard Peltier to prison, that agent James Reynolds, and he too has now stepped forward last November in Washington, D.C. He was there with the long walkers who walked from Minneapolis in September and arrived in Washington, D.C. in November, over 1,000 miles. And James Reynolds himself was there, and he also called on the president for his release. And indeed, there is a vendetta. 2 men were released for self-defense, and Leonard aiding and abetting in prison, 2 life terms, aiding and abetting who, if the 2 other defendants were released for self-defense, my relatives. So let's look at that. And the vendetta, we have former retired FBI agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Ms. Colleen Cowley, who also said that she knows the culture of the FBI includes this vendetta against Native Americans and Leonard Peltier. She wrote to the President Biden that it's time to release him. She's the first FBI agent and former retired now who has stepped up and said it's time for Leonard. So I wanted you to keep that in mind, that we're not just here talking, about a man, that should stay in there. All of this is against him, including the rights on the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. He's entitled to every one of those 46 principles. So I call on you to look on the internet. What are the rights of Indigenous peoples under the Declaration on the rights of Indigenous people. You'll see that not just individually, but collectively, we're very much a part of that and bound to that. I'd like to now, or Jean.
These are some friends from South Dakota. They work with the Wambaliska Society, which does a lot of work in our community. They've been real supportive of Leonard, and we did a combined powwow during the 50th anniversary of Wounded Knee in Rapid City, South Dakota, which we also call Racist City. Very racist. They also call it the Deep North. So we're in an environment where we had an opportunity to have a powwow in memory of the Wounded Knee takeover. And one of the things that happened in Rapid City back then was that they had meetings there before the Wounded Knee takeover. And during those meetings, people came from all over South Dakota and testified about what was going on, you know, why they were there, what change needed to be done. And one of the changes that they were seeking was just plain, you know, just justice, where you have Native people that were being killed, which included the Bad Heart Bulls. And the people that murdered him were only charged with like assault, something really, you know, ironic. So the people got really mad. They went to Custer, which became where American Indian Movement leaders went and talked to the sheriffs and asked, why are these inequities going on? And it's not the first one, there's several. And to date, it's still the same. They had a riot up there, and maybe a couple days before that or after, I'm not sure, members of American Indian Movement went into all the bars in Rapid City, which were several, and all of them had violations against our people. My mother was one of them, and they went in there all the same time, and they just tore the bars up. So Rapid City has a vendetta against American Indian Movement. But now we have so many great organizations in there, and I'm just really proud of these guys for coming. We have Tara White Eagle and her daughter Kaylee, and she will be representing Miss AIM Grassroots, and she'll be doing her intervention for Leonard Peltier. We feel that our youth is very important, and I'm just happy that her mother and daughter came, and she has some of her own personal issues she'd like to come back to the United Nations and address them too. Maybe she could talk about it. And here's Tara.
Hamadakiapi, Tara Wedigo Machiapi, located in Rapid City. Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe is where we're enrolled. We do have an organization of Wambaliska Kolikichie that is in our town of Rapid City. We are deeply rooted in our community with being supporters, coming in prayer with song and drum and dance, of the healing dance that my daughter dances, the jingle dress dance. And so with all that being said, I mean, we are here representing AIM West, but we are AIM Grassroots back home. And being able to just have these opportunities to be in settings where our voice could be heard, where our problems can be addressed and heard, you know, and all the way down to my daughter, to the youth. And that's where our Wambaliska Kolikichie, that is a teen center, and it's focused on our Native youth in our community who get treated like how us Indigenous people get treated in this world, period. They are the ones that are turned away and not accepted, and because they might be a little righteous, and, you know, but we're there for them, supporting them in any which way needed that's possible. And so then that's what I'm instilling into my daughter, into my kids, into her generation, hoping to set a platform, a foundation for something that she can stand on and be proud of. And, you know, not have to grow up in this world of unjust. And it's sad, the more and more we hear, we think we know what we're here about. We Leonard's case, we think we know what we're here, but when you keep hearing it, it's just, how is this happening? And why do we want our kids to grow up into this? It's unfortunate that we already had to grow up into this situation of not being heard, and we're not as good as the rest of the people in this world because of where we come from and how we speak, how we look, what we wear. You know, and I want my daughter to be proud of who she is. And if somebody has something to say, I want her to stand up for that as well. Stand up for herself, stand up for her people, and be heard in a proper manner. We're human too, at the end of the day. And so I'm very proud of my daughter. She is Miss Dakota AIM. She's been dancing since she was 4 years old. And she's always been in supportive of anything that feels right. It's a lifestyle where we come from. You know, this is just not a rant and a rave and feelings and emotions. This is a lifestyle where we come from, of being turned away, not being heard. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to my daughter, Kaylee.
Thank you, Tara. And before we do it, I'd just like to say that Kaylee Martinez is our young youth representative here, and it's great because after we're gone, Kaylee and her people and our friends will be here talking about human rights defenders, other political prisoners around the world, and to stay strong. And please, Kaylee, if you can just introduce yourself briefly with the short time that we do have, and if you can read to the people the intervention that would be before the floor tomorrow. Please. Say a few words. Or part of it, yes.
Hello, my friends and relatives. Hello, my friends and relatives. The importance of my platform here is to bring the awareness and educate the disparities and inequality for the Native Americans. American, at the scale not seen by other minorities, and those of us that have found our voice, it's our responsibility to speak for those that have been silenced.
Thank you very much, Kaylee. And my friends, as we're closing up here, we may have time for a few words. Jimbo, you want, because I have some closing words as well.
I just wanted to point out too that it was in 1977 that Leonard's case was brought to the United Nations. And also since that time, particularly here in this forum, Special Rapporteur James Anaya was the first ever to visit Leonard Peltier. And last year, the working group on arbitrary detention made a report on his incarceration and what it means and the violations that are happening in international law and what the U.S. is doing to Leonard Peltier. And we're hoping that we can get another visit to Leonard Peltier with this special rapporteur who's just recently been appointed, Francisco Cali, that he can go visit and see for himself the condition that Leonard Peltier is in at this very time. So we're hoping that that will also be a recommendation to many of the participants here. So if they can make that recommendation as well, we would really appreciate it.
Gene, you have a minute or two?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank everybody for having us here at the United Nations. I think that we can make a difference if we help each other and look at everybody's issues and connect and share in our communities. And I know Leonard's been in there for a long time, and the mental and the physical anguish, has caught up to him, and it's really sad. So we'll ask for some extra prayers for him, and thank you, Madakiasi.
Thank you very much, Gene Roach. And my relatives, as we're closing, we still have some more minutes, but I just wanted to point out some historical highlights here. It's been 100 years that the first indigenous person came into the halls of the United Nations, and that was Chief Destaque of the Cayuga Nation of the Iroquois Six Confederacy Nations, and that was in 1923. in Geneva, Switzerland. And at that time, it was called the League of Nations. Today, it's the United Nations, but it's been 100 years. And he went there to talk about honoring the treaties, to watch out for the environment, respect the land and the animals, and the same advocacy issues that we talk about and bring here today. We're seeing changes. The big change is up ahead, but we initiated here. It's moving forward gradually, but it's happening. It's 100 years. Think of that. In March 1923, when he got there. I also want to highlight that 200 years ago this year is the famous, infamous U.S. Supreme Court decision in the Johnson v. McIntosh. And Johnson v. McIntosh, that was on the issue of land. And indeed, in 1823, they came out with the reference to the doctrine of discovery. Can you imagine that? The doctrine of discovery is that kind of like the pink slip for people that have cars. You know, if you have that pink slip, you own it. Well, the United States is waiving that doctrine of discovery, that they took it, you know, fair and square. Manifest destiny was ordained, you know, by the Christian forward movement. Manifest destiny, it was referred to, that doctrine. And so now today, fast forward just, 2-3 weeks ago, the Pope Francis and the Catholic, the Vatican in Rome has repudiated that doctrine of discovery. That piece of paper that is used around the world by other colonial forces as the settlers, and using that as their right to take the land. And it's repudiated, but it's not revoked. We want it revoked. And until that happens, you know, we will all start to get on the same footing. But it's very crucial that we understand and learn that doctrine of discovery. That could be like a metaphor, but it refers to the papal bulls that were signed back in 1493 and even some before that are now being disputed. So now that it's being repudiated, and hopefully it's going to be revoked, but what's that going to do to the U.S. Constitution and the cases that they've used that? I have to say, unfortunately, the Supreme Court Justice Ruth Ginsburg brought that doctrine of discovery in her case in 2005, unfortunately, in reference to the Oneida people in Wisconsin. So look that up and go forward with us in understanding that further. And I just want to say that Gene referred to the man that was killed in June of '75 in that shootout, that firefight, where the 2 FBI agents were killed. And the American Indian that was killed is Joe Killswright Stuntz, that we should all remember as well as a victim of that military onslaught that came on. Let's see what our time is. We have some good time. I don't know if Kaylee, you want to say anything? Or Tara, Gene, Jimbo, you want to give a message out to the people here? We got about 3 minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes. I just want to say that for my own personal experience and walking the halls of the UN, I can say from when I first participated, and for me, I call it the longest walk. And I refer that longest walk to the Trail of Tears. And I don't call it the Trail of Tears. I call it the Trail of Death and Tears. And if some of you know, that's when the forced relocations of the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, the Cherokees, and the Seminoles were forcefully removed to Oklahoma. And not much is heard about the Choctaws, but the Choctaws was the first group that was moved out of Mississippi, Alabama, and that's my relatives. And I have been doing some genealogy stuff, and I have found where my relatives come from, where they crossed, where they what they call the manifest list on the boats that they were crossing over the river. So I found those out, and so I was hoping that sometime that I'm gonna be able to put down. Well, what I was looking at was writing about our work within the United Nations and what brought us here, the American Indian movement. But then I found out that I'm gonna have to include my history on that particular trail, you know, what brought us all to here. And today, as a Choctaw here in the United Nations, still struggling to bring respect and rights to who we are. We don't always see eye to eye with tribal governments, but we know that we can work with them. And so we're hoping that in the future that this work within the United Nations will materialize to respect for our sovereignty and our rights as well.
Thank you very much, William Jimbo Simmons. And my relatives, I want to promote a TV program that you are able to watch. It's called Eagle and Condor. It's on Sundays, based out of San Francisco, and it's 4 p.m., sometimes to 5 and 6. It's a public access TV channel, and you can look at it live streaming at aim-west.org. Also, radio station KPFA, Pacifica Public Access Radio in Berkeley, live streaming kpfa.org. And I have a rotating radio program there on Wednesdays called Bay Native Circle from 7 to 8 p.m. So tune in. I'll be broadcasting some of the speeches that were given here for that hour of Indigenous peoples making their interventions here. That's it. I want to thank my relatives for being here, and continued prayers for Leonard Peltier. Let's all get him out and just pray hard, my relatives. Stay strong, and let's face the wind together. A hope.
Free Leonard Peltier.
Free Leonard Peltier.
Thank you, guys.
And my relatives, I want to include an intervention that is a statement that was read at the United Nations by AIM West, and the speaker was Matsatsina Costa, and it's totally about Leonard Peltier, and it's a 3-minute statement, so tune in on that. And we're coming close to the end. I just want to remind you, Stanford Powwow is coming up for Mother's Day. That's the May 12th, 13th, and 14th, so we'll see you there at the Stanford Powwow. That's it, my relatives. Another program, Eagle and the Condor.
Good day, Five Serpent. Madam Chairman, in behalf of AIM West, each year we are saddened to remind this forum that Mr. Leonard Peltier, Anishinaabe and Dakota, and enrolled citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, has been wrongfully incarcerated by the United States since 1976. Leonard Peltier was a leader of the American Indian Movement, an historic civil rights group founded to combat the oppression of Native Americans in the United States. Mr. Peltier's case has become infamous for the procedural violations committed by the government throughout his trial. After Mr. Peltier's co-defendants were acquitted on self-defense, the government resorted to using illegal tactics to ensure his conviction, concealing exculpatory evidence from his lawyers, intimidating witnesses with violence, and committing perjury on the witness stand. Mr. Peltier's jury was prevented from considering key evidence, including government misconduct in the preparation of his case and evidence of violent conditions in the Pine Ridge Reservation, all of which contributed significantly to the acquittal of Mr. Peltier's co-defendants. In its treatment of Mr. Peltier over the last 48 years, the U.S. has committed glaring violations of internal human rights law and set a dangerous precedent for states seeking to silence indigenous dissent. On March 30, 2022, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention adopted a legal opinion calling for Mr. Peltier's immediate release, concluding Mr. Peltier continues to be detained because he is Native American, contrary to Article 2 and 7 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 2 and 26 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The working group also concluded that the Parole Commission did not objectively and substantially consider whether parole should be granted to Mr. Peltier in violation of Article 9 of that covenant. Mr. Peltier is 78 years old, and he suffers from serious health conditions where he is not receiving adequate care. Despite his condition, the U.S. has repeatedly denied a transfer to a lower security facility. Of the 48 years he has been in prison, Mr. Peltier has spent 5 of them in solitary confinement. This treatment may constitute a violation of the Convention Against Torture, Article 7 of the Covenant, which prohibits cruel, inhumane, and degrading punishment. Mr. Peltier continued incarceration as a threat to all indigenous human rights defenders everywhere. We must seek justice for Leonard Peltier, to support indigenous dissent, promote accountability for the repression of indigenous leaders, and to ensure that Mr. Peltier can one day return to his community. We request that the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous people exercises authority under paragraph 2C and its revised mandate to initiate a dialogue with the United States, the Human Rights Organization, and indigenous peoples to seek relief for Mr. Peltier. Further, we invite the UN Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Peoples, Francisco Cali, and members of the UN Permanent Forum and MRIP to visit Mr. Leonard Peltier at the U.S. Penitentiary in Florida and report back to this body on their assessment of Mr. Peltier's condition. Our delegation would be glad to work with you to accommodate such a visit.
BIA termination policy into legislation. Boarding schools run by government fools. Assimilation and reservations. You take an Indian child from home many a mile and work upon their minds. Make them just like you, if not a prison will do, and you commit the crime. Want you to know I don't want to be a part of you anymore. I've got my own way. I'll walk your way. I've got my own way. I'll walk your way. Alcohol, education, and law, weapons of today. But see the eagle fly high in the red people's sky. The spirit's here to stay. Like a strong tree we stand, our roots deep in the land. We call the earth our mother. Turn away our minds from things that make men blind and pray for one another. Want you to know I don't want to be a part of you